Young, healthy men disappear after a normal night of fun in Austin, Texas. Days later, their bodies turn up in the calm waters of Lady Bird Lake, always without witnesses, almost always without explanation. The Texas serial killer who has never been caught until today. Or maybe he doesn't even exist. Since 2022, a series of mysterious deaths around the city's most famous lake has turned a tourist spot into a stage for fear and disturbing theories. Authorities talk about accidents, the public talks about a pattern, and the victims' families, they talk about impunity. How did so many bodies end up there with no clear signs of violence? Those who survived report drugs, persecution, attempted drowning. But the police say none of this is a crime. So, are we facing a hidden killer or an even more frightening truth? The answer may lie in the names that have been forgotten and in those that may yet disappear. But before I tell you, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss the best true crime videos. At first glance, Lady Bird Lake is a postcard-perfect setting, surrounded by trails, modern buildings, and trendy bars. The lake cuts through downtown Austin like an urban respite. During the day, families picnic, couples paddle in kayaks, and tourists take selfies with the landscape reflected in the water. But at night, beauty gives way to mystery. It was there, in that same body of water, that more than 20 bodies were found since 2008, and in the last 3 years, the cases have multiplied, almost all with the same sinister plot. A young man disappears after a night on Rainey Street, and days later, the body is pulled from the water. Jason John, Jonathan Honey, Christopher Gutierrez, Clifton Axel. Names that sound different but have something in common. All young, all last seen in bars near the lake, all found floating in silence. The families of the victims describe the same days of anguish. Unanswered calls, disconnected security cameras, desperate searches along the shores of the lake, and when the police finally do come up with an answer, it almost always comes with 3 words: unsuspicious drowning. But how can they accept this when their son, brother, friend was an athlete, a swimmer, or simply someone who knew where he was and had no reason to jump in the water? For many in Austin, pain has turned to distrust, and grief has turned to anger, because each new body recovered doesn't just carry a broken story, it also carries the question that no one can keep quiet. If it's all an accident, why do they keep dying the same way? The first name that attracted attention was Jason John. In February 2023, he was 30 years old, healthy, sociable, and went out drinking with friends on Rainey Street. Security cameras show him walking alone in the area around 2 a.m. After that, there was silence. His body was found days later in Lady Bird Lake with no visible signs of violence. The cause: accidental drowning. In April, Jonathan Honey, 33, repeated the same route. He was celebrating a bachelor party when he got separated from the group for a few minutes. His body was found floating in the lake. The police also ruled out foul play, despite reports that he had been seen in a confused state and running before disappearing. That same week, Christopher Hayes Clark, another young man, disappeared after leaving a bar alone. The body, as in the other cases, surfaced in the lake, with no clear signs of a struggle, no explanation, and these are not isolated cases. In 2022, 4 bodies were found in the same lake, including Ricky Parks and Christopher Gutierrez. In 2024, by March, 3 more victims had been recovered, including, for the first time, a woman. She was found on March 27th, which raised even more questions. The pattern seemed too clear to be a coincidence. Young people, mostly male, all frequenting the same nightlife area of the city, Rainey Street, all found in the same body of water, and all, according to the police, died by accident. But if they were just accidents, why did some bodies show signs of physical trauma, such as bruises and fractures, that did not match a simple drowning? That's what started to appear in the reports, and also in the accounts of those who survived. Christian Pugh was one of those cases. In 2018, he was found on the shores of the lake, disoriented, with bruises and signs of possible poisoning. He later told the press that he believed he had been drugged and pushed into the water. He said he remembered being in a bar after talking to strangers and waking up already wet, in pain, and confused. Jeff Jones, another survivor, reported something similar. He passed out after drinking a little, felt a blackout, and woke up floating near the lake with strange injuries on his arms. Both underwent toxicology tests, and the results showed traces of substances such as rohypnol and MDMA, drugs common in ambush crimes. Even so, the police treated the cases as accidents. Meanwhile, residents created amateur maps with the exact locations of the disappearances and discovered geographic coincidences. Many of the bodies appeared in areas contrary to the natural flow of the water, suggesting that they could have been placed there, not swept away by the current. Another sinister detail emerged with one of the bodies, eyes covered with duct tape and hands partially tied. Even so, the case was officially closed as self-inflicted death by drowning. The authorities' explanations always revolved around the same factors: high alcohol consumption, poor lighting, slippery terrain, lack of physical barriers around the lake. But these arguments began to sound like excuses, and with each new body found, more people stopped believing the official versions. An online petition was created to demand that the investigation be reopened. Within a few weeks, it had gathered thousands of signatures. The population was asking not only for justice, but also for concrete measures: installation of cameras, fences, lighting, and constant patrols in the area of Rainey Street and the shores of the lake. But as the requests grew, so did the number of victims, and the whispers grew louder. Is there a serial killer in Austin? Could it be someone who knows the city's routine? Or could it be worse, and no one is actually investigating? The authorities insisted there was no evidence of a crime, but the population was already certain of something else. Something or someone is lurking in that lake. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. Since the first reports of bodies at Lady Bird Lake, the Austin Police Department has maintained a firm stance. There is no evidence of foul play. At every press conference, the position has been the same. Drownings are isolated incidents caused by excessive alcohol consumption, disorientation, and poor nighttime visibility. But that stance soon began to crumble in the face of the growing number of deaths and the similarity between the cases. According to local press reports, investigators did not follow a rigorous standard of forensics on all the bodies. In many cases, the victims' cell phones were lost or discarded without in-depth analysis. Text messages from the previous hours were not thoroughly checked, and security footage, when available, was not fully explored. In addition, toxicology reports were slow to be released, and when they were, they often omitted crucial information. In at least 3 confirmed cases, substances such as rohypnol, a powerful sedative used in sex crimes, were detected but not investigated as evidence of a possible assault. The official explanation: voluntary use or cross-effect with alcohol. The stance caused outrage among the victims' families. Mothers, siblings, and friends began to organize parallel search groups, gather evidence on their own, and post complaints on social media about police omission and lack of interest. One of these groups, called Lady Bird Lake Watch, gathers geolocated information, witness accounts, and timelines with the victims' last known steps. And what began as a mourning movement has become a citizen investigation front. The community realized that there was more in common than just the geography of the deaths. Many of the missing young men had similar heights and appearances, a clear target profile. Young men, usually white or Latino, with a history of active social life, well-connected, and, most frighteningly, without any history of emotional disturbances or risky behavior. Theories began to spread. The first and most obvious: a serial killer is operating in Austin. This idea was reinforced after reports from survivors and the discovery of bizarre details on some of the bodies. One of them was found with his eyes covered with duct tape, another with his hands tied with shoelaces, elements that suggest control, premeditation, and in some cases, sadism. Criminologists who have analyzed this data in podcasts and online forums have pointed to patterns similar to the well-documented group known as the smiley face killers, a theory about a network of serial killers who allegedly operate in different cities, kidnapping and drowning similar young people in locations near parties and nightclubs, always with minimal police intervention. Although this theory has never been officially confirmed, many consider it plausible in the context of Austin. A second theory, less conspiratorial but equally alarming, speaks of opportunistic predators, criminals who take advantage of the vulnerability of young people who are drunk in poorly monitored areas to attack, abuse, and dispose of the bodies without leaving a trace. In this scenario, the lake would be the ideal hiding place, large, dark, and with irregular currents. There is also a third line of thought: systemic negligence. For those who support this theory, the real problem is not the existence of a serial killer, but rather a city that has grown too quickly, with bars and nightlife booming, but without adequate public infrastructure to ensure safety. It would therefore be a perfect storm: alcohol, lack of supervision, absence of physical barriers to the lake, and negligence on the part of the authorities. But here comes the most uncomfortable point. Even if this is the case, a succession of tragic accidents, why do the authorities continue to treat the cases with such coldness? Why are so many elements that suggest human intervention ignored? The questions grew even more after an emblematic episode: the case of a young man who was seen being followed by two men on cameras near Rainey Street. Minutes later, he disappeared. His body was found in the lake 3 days later. The police had access to the images, but did not identify the suspects, and the case, like so many others, was closed as accidental death. The silence of the mayor's office and the police force only fuels the feeling that something is being swept under the rug. In an interview with a local news station, a retired detective who reviewed the report stated, "If this were in New York or Chicago, and instead of water, it was an alley, we would have a task force already in action. Here, the answer is always the same: it was an accident." But accidents don't happen with that precision. Meanwhile, Rainey Street remains crowded. Bars stay open late. The lake, surrounded by trails without cameras and poor lighting, remains unchanged. And with each new disappearance, fear mixes with indignation, because what is killing in Austin could be an invisible killer, or it could be something even worse: a system that refuses to see. The big shift in the way the public viewed Lady Bird Lake didn't come from a researcher or an authority figure. It came from a survivor, and a story that, if told alone, could even be discarded. But this, in the right context, became impossible to ignore. Christian Pugh had everything to be another name on the list of bodies pulled from the lake, but he survived, and what he said in interviews put the city on alert. According to him, he was having a normal night out with friends on Rainey Street when he accepted a drink from strangers. A few minutes later, he began to feel dizzy, disoriented, and passed out. When he regained consciousness, he was in the water, with bruises all over his body and no phone. He was rescued by a cyclist who was passing by the riverbank. In the emergency room, the toxicology report revealed something disturbing: traces of rohypnol and alcohol, the typical combination of ambush crimes. But the investigation did not progress. Police treated the case as an accidental fall. The same pattern repeated itself with Jeff Jones, another survivor who woke up on the shores of the lake with no memory of how he got there. She had bruises on her face and arms, and according to the report, there were also sedative substances in his system. These reports began circulating on social media and attracting national attention. The local press, previously discreet, began to cover the cases in more depth, and it was at this moment that new evidence came to light. One of the most shocking episodes involved a body found with its eyes covered with duct tape and its wrists half-tied with shoelaces. The official explanation: self-inflicted death. The justification did not even convince forensic experts invited by investigative journalism networks. The impact was immediate. Independent media outlets began reviewing each case side by side. They found that at least 7 of the victims had similar physical patterns: marks of restraint, signs of trauma to the back of the head, and even injuries to the feet that suggested they had been swept away before entering the water. Another disturbing finding came from the analysis of geographic data. Experts in urban mapping demonstrated that the bodies did not follow the logic of the natural currents of Lady Bird Lake. Many were found in areas opposite the direction of the water, which would indicate that they were not simply being carried by the current, but rather positioned. And then, something even more disturbing. records of victims being followed by unidentified people on security cameras near the bars. Some of these records were ignored or classified as inconclusive in the investigation, but the repetition of the pattern, a victim separated from the group, followed by 2 or 3 men, and then disappeared, attracted too much attention to be ignored. For many experts, what is happening in Austin is reminiscent not only of the alleged smiley face killers, but also of patterns seen in historical crime sprees in cities such as Boston, Chicago, and Minneapolis. They always involve young, vulnerable men and bodies found in water after nights of fun. And with that, the question that once seemed exaggerated began to echo with force. There really is a serial killer operating in Texas, and he is hiding behind incompetence. But there was something even more shocking. A private investigator, hired by the families of 3 of the victims, told the press that there was a connection between the messages on the cell phones of 2 of them. Both men exchanged messages with an unidentified number, with invitations to after parties after the bars closed. The number was never traced. Coincidence? Or the first digital trace of a grooming ring that has been operating under the radar for years? The answer is still hidden by the murky waters of Lady Bird Lake, but now everyone is watching, and someone, somewhere, knows exactly what is happening. Lady Bird Lake is still there, reflecting the Austin sky as if nothing had happened. But when you look at that water now, you see more than just a landscape. You see the faces of young people who never returned home, the questions that no one answered, and the silences that speak too loudly. We may never know if there is a serial killer behind these deaths. Perhaps the answer is more cruel, the sum of negligence, unpreparedness, and institutional neglect. But that doesn't change the result. Families destroyed, lives interrupted, and a city that learned the hard way that tragedy also lives where there is partying. What happened at Lady Bird Lake is a wake-up call, not just for Austin, but for any place where public safety is replaced by statistics and where young people can disappear without anyone really investigating, because danger doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a uniform or a public office. And the scariest thing is not thinking that there is a killer on the loose. It's realizing that maybe no one is really trying to find him. If this story made you uneasy, share it. Silence is what these cases have most in common. And if you want more investigations like this, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Here, every name matters, every clue counts, and every voice can be the difference between another death or justice.